Hello, and welcome to the Feeling Good podcast, where you can learn powerful techniques to change the way you feel. I am your host, Dr. Rhonda Borowski, and joining me here in the Murrieta studio is Dr. David Burns. Dr. Burns is a pioneer in the development of cognitive behavioral therapy and the creator of the new TEAM therapy. He is the author of Feeling Good, which has sold over 5 million copies in the United States and has been translated into over 30 languages. His latest book, Feeling Great, contains powerful new techniques that make rapid recovery possible for many people struggling with depression and anxiety. Dr. Burns is currently an emeritus adjunct professor of clinical psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine.
Hello, Rhonda.
Hi, David. How are you?
Good.
And welcome, everyone, to episode 238. And today we have two really special guests, Robert Schacter and Sharon Batista, and they are team therapists in New York City. And they have started a team book club to read David's new book, Feeling Great, with therapists. And we're going to talk about their book club. We're really excited to hear how that got started and what they're talking about. And people in the book club have questions for Dr. Burns. So I'll just give you their bios, and then we'll read a couple of endorsements and then jump in with questions for them.
Cool.
So Robert Schechter, actually, I met Robert Schechter in 2013 at the first intensive I attended. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. I totally remember.
Yeah. He's a psychologist in New York. He's an assistant clinical professor at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. He's a founding fellow of the New York City Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Association and has been closely associated with the American Behavioral Cognitive Therapy Association. He's also written 2 books, which is something I just found out: When Your Child is Afraid and Mindfulness for Stress Management. So welcome, Bob.
Thank you.
And Dr. Sharon Batista is a psychiatrist in private practice in New York City. Dr. Bautista trained in psychiatry at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City and completed her fellowship training at New York University. Dr. Bautista is on the faculty of the Icahn School of Medicine, where she teaches psychiatric residents and psychotherapy, including CBT and TEAM. Or she teaches psychiatric residents about psychotherapy, including CBT and TEAM. She specializes in the treatment of depressive and anxiety disorders, as well as in the treatment of people with medical illnesses. So welcome.
Thanks so much. It's awesome to be here.
It's great to have both of you. Bob, I've been a huge fan of yours for years. Every time I see you, my heart is just flooded with joy. I'm so happy to share both of you with our audience. I think I'm excited, and I think our listeners are going to be really excited about what you two have to say, and I have no idea what we're going to talk about, but I just know it's going to be tremendous. So I think you have a comment or two to read, and then we'll dive right in.
Yeah, great. So we posted episode 234 on March 22nd, and that was on how to deal with whiners and complainers. And we got an endorsement from someone, from a listener in India, and he or she wrote, "I really love the podcasts, and this episode was right on time while I was facing certain difficulties in my professional life. Thank you for the enlightening podcasts, and Rhonda, you're a wonderful host." And that is from Jatheen, and thank you so much for those kind words.
I certainly agree with that. You are a wonderful host, and I just feel so lucky to be lucky to be working with you and to know you.
Thank you. Yeah, the honor is all mine. And then we have another one from about episode 231, which we posted March 1st, and that was on hiking therapy with Philip Lalonis. And Robert Wiley, who's a trainee in our Wednesday class, wrote, thank you for this awesome podcast. I always love hearing about David's Sunday hikes, and it was almost painful since it seemed impossible to recreate or do something similar. And here is Philip living the dream. Very, very, very inspiring. It was also good to hear about therapeutic errors and ski therapy. This was a beautiful hike, Robert.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, folks, for all the kind comments you sent in. I wish we could read them all, but there just so many of them. But it just warms my heart. I know Rhonda's heart too, to hear the gratitude that you expressed for the podcast. Thanks so much for that.
Yeah. Hey, so,
and also I wanted to tell you we had a huge turnout for Monday's podcast.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, there almost 9,000 downloads in one day.
Wow. That was the podcast on anti-heckler and anti-whiners.
Yeah, I thought people might not like it, but they really, really liked it.
Good. Yeah. Well, you guys, Bob and Sharon, can we call you Sharon? We're really curious and interested to hear how you got the idea to even start the Feeling Great book club for therapists.
To be honest, and I feel like a little silly, sharing this with you, but I'm a human being. So it's just so simple why we got started and how we got started. I was so excited to get a hold of Dr. Burns' book and start working through the material and learning it that I ordered it in both formats. I ordered it in the hardcover and the Kindle, and I just had to have it as soon as possible. But then I realized once I had it that I had a hard time working through it while like taking care of my kids and running my practice and doing all the things I do every day. And I really wanted to have a reason, a motivation to stick with it and work through it, all the material, and really, really get it. And I just thought one day, I bet you other people have also just bought the book hot off the presses, just like me, and want to do the same in our community. And so I emailed our community and I said, does anyone want to do like a book club? I'm in a book club here in my town, and it's just really cool to have this shared experience of reading something and talking over the ideas. And so I thought, why can't us therapists and psychiatrists do that? And then out of the blue, I think Bob saw my posting Bob, did I contact you? I forget.
No, I saw the post.
You saw the post. Oh, okay. I couldn't remember that part. And
a minute after it came up, I said, wait a minute, what a brilliant idea.
Well, you were really kind. You did say that, but also like Bob, I just admire you so much. I mean, you've taught me a great deal in our local team group. And so when you offered, I couldn't say no. I had to go for it. We could have Bob teaching and we could read this book together and share it as a community. I mean, like, what more can I say? So we did it.
Cool.
That to me is kind of like a dream, because I was slaving over that book for years. I wasn't in a hurry to write it because I didn't have any self-imposed deadline, and that there's just a lot of material there. And I got to thinking, I don't know if anyone will like it or anyone will read it. And then when I saw you guys' book club, I thought, my gosh, this is so fantastic, and what a great way, because there's just so much stuff in the book. I took out 9 chapters as it was, and it's still pretty big, but it reminded me when Feeling Good came out, I was totally unknown, and the publisher had only published, printed a few thousand copies. And then I got my first fan letter. It was from a fellow in Washington, D.C., a medical student, and he'd been reading the book, and he got me on the telephone at home and said he was reading it and it was helpful to him. And I thought, this might be my only fan. So I talked to him for like 3 hours because I wanted to get the most juice out of that I could. And so I felt equally excited when I heard about your book club.
Mm-hmm. No, it was really fabulous. The thing that was so cool about it is there were about how many, 36 or 40 people, Sharon, who signed up?
Sometimes, upwards sometimes, yeah.
And they ranged in experience from level 1s to some level 4s. And
those are people who are certified by in the team world.
Right. So and what it means in English is some had just come to one of David's workshops, and some had been doing it for many years. And so the thing that was so neat, though, was that there was a community that formed around this book. And people loved taking it in small chunks so that they could read it, digest it. And one person said what they loved most is that there was no pressure. They didn't feel like in training groups where they've been, where they had to perform or they had to really know it. And it was reassuring because this stuff is pretty complex. And, and the idea that other people might think it's complex as well really was reassuring to some of the members. But the cool thing was that we became like a community, and we'd meet only every other week. But you recognize similar faces, and people would be contributing their thoughts. And it just became very, very enriching. And it was like this group. And it was really so much fun.
If I can make a comment on that, I agree about the community. People, by and large, felt so positive about that we had this like space just for devoting to this material. And because it's a therapist only book group, to the challenges that we face ourselves as flawed human beings that we are in learning and doing and teaching, and everybody really, I think it all resonated, the support around that, and that like we all make mistakes, and it's a process of learning. It's not just like you read a book overnight and then you do it. There's like practice that goes in, and these are real basics, I think, to learning. But we forget because we're all on our own on little islands, like by ourselves with our patients. We forget that this is really a skill. Mm-hmm. I think the group offered like a lot of support around that for a lot of us who are still in the learning stages.
Well, we're all in the learning stages, and we all screw up all the time. At least I do. But I think what you're saying is so neat, Sharon and Bob. I have a question for you, because as you know, I've been pouring an equal amount of effort into the development of this Feeling Great app with several younger colleagues, and we're pretty excited about what we're doing. You know, we're starting to do beta testing, and you never know how something's going to come out, but we're pretty excited. But we've also been telling ourselves that we would love to see some kind of a support group emerge out of the people who are using this app, who would be therapists to some extent, but primarily patients. And so I'm kind of listening with my third ear, because when you work with the general public, you have to be a little careful that you're not offering therapy to large numbers of people and then have some bad events and get sued or something like that. But I think there would be some, terrific potential. Even people who read my first book, Feeling Good, quite a few of them improved or recovered from depression. But to be able to offer this support component, maybe we could just have something kind of like what you guys are doing for app users, and they could meet every 2 weeks or something like that for an hour or 2 hours and, exchange ideas or ask questions. It's all kind of vague in our minds, but we all feel that community thing that you're mentioning and getting support and encouragement is so important. That's what we have in our Tuesday group at Stanford. It's a training group, and it started with 2 people, and now we have about 50 a week at least. And Rhonda's got a Wednesday training group and has a 50 also. And part of what adds to the magic, and I better shut up here because I want to pick you guys' brains, but is that support thing, that there's warmth, there's safety. It's a very warm and loving experience. A lot of time the therapists do personal work in the Tuesday group, and tears are shed and laughter occurs. And for a lot of us, it's the highlight of the week, really, because of that warmth that you're talking about, and really seeing people on a deeper level. And we can all be just ordinary and human, and, it's okay to share how you feel and share your failures, etc. I'll shut up.
Well, I want to reiterate that too, and underline that from the very beginning of learning too, the level of camaraderie and the sense of community has really been, one of the things that attracts me to Learning Team and being part of this community. And I just love, Sharon and Bob, that you have created that with this book club. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So you had sent Dr. Burns some questions that members of your book club have Did they ask you to ask Dr. Burns because they knew you were doing this podcast, or are they questions that just have been generated over the weeks?
Well, we were, when we knew about the podcast, we started thinking about what can we take from the group that would be interesting. And so these are some of the questions that people had. And we asked what the things were that were most helpful to them, and what things did we talk about. And the thing that was most helpful is that David shared 2 hours of his time one day visiting us. And that was just stunning, because David, you were just so wonderful in terms of answering people's questions and hanging out with us. That was the highlight of the entire group. It was wonderful.
I'm really glad to hear that. It was a highlight for me. I just loved being in your group, and I'm suffer from severe narcissistic personality disorder, which I try to nurture and develop a little bit more all the time. But one of the things is I enjoy being the center of attention and asking questions. And so I was just flying high the whole time. It was just so much fun to be in your group. It felt so welcoming. And I have a quick question before we get into these awesome questions that you sent. But would you say that the benefit of the group for the members was on learning, a bit more about TEAM-CBT, perhaps at a deeper level, or about, skill development for the members, or about, personal healing for the members, using the methods in the book on themselves while attending the book club?
Well, we didn't address the latter very much, and people didn't really relate it to. Sharon, did people relate it to their own issues? It was more about their own issues.
Not as much as they disclosed, more to their professional work and their development as therapists.
Right.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah.
Where issues came up where they were working with patients and didn't know how to apply certain things, or didn't know really how do you use this under these conditions. And so from that point of view, and also just being focused around learning this all together, I think that was, again, a very big part for people.
Mm-hmm.
However,
did they stick with the group pretty well?
Say it again?
Did they stick with the group? Did you have a lot of attrition?
Not that much. Sharon, you kept track of it better than I.
Well, we had a really, really huge enrollment. We had about 60 people sign up. To me, that's huge. Maybe not.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is.
You have 9,000 podcast downloads. I mean,
yeah.
It's a whole other level for you.
Yeah.
So pretty consistently about 30 people would come in. This last one, I think, was less convenient. So we had a little bit less. I think it was in the 20s. And our last meeting, wrapping up, is in 2 weeks. So we'll see.
Oh, cool. Let's see. I was going to ask something else. Oh, yeah. Do you know Brandon Vance? I think you both know him?
Yeah.
Well, Brandon
he joined us.
We invited
he joined you. Oh,
yeah.
How fantastic.
Generous enough to do it. It was awesome to have him.
Well, he's, in our neck of the woods here, so we know and love him and have worked with him in a variety of ways. But he's starting 2 weeks ago two Feeling Great book clubs for the general public. And one is early morning, one is, I think, late afternoon, so people all over the world can join in. And he was hoping against hope to get 100 in each of those groups, and he oversubscribed. So we'll see how that works out. And then we're having someone in for a podcast on Friday who's been using my book, 10 Days to Self-Esteem, which was intended as a self-help group for depressed people. But she's a therapist, and she's been using that and doing groups for years. So she's going to talk about that side of the equation too. There's a very important question that needs to be asked at this point, and Rhonda will ask it.
Okay, great. In our last podcast that was published 237 that was published April 12th, the week before this one, we talked about the gentle ultimatum, which is a part of the process resistance process, of the structure of TEAM. And you have some questions here about resistance. I was wondering if we could start with there, since that would kind of follow up on last week's podcast.
Well,
sure.
So one of the questions people were trying to get their heads around is the whole concept of unconscious resistance and the benefit of becoming that resistance so that they end up arguing with us to get better. But some of the people had questions about how that works.
You're asking
how
why
that works
therapists...
and if it works and how to work with it. All of that.
Well, I would just say off the top of my head that particularly if you're working with depression and anxiety, I would say resistance is a very positive thing. There's also a dark side to human nature that you get into more when you're working with relationship problems and habits and addictions. But just sticking with depression and anxiety, the whole thing of positive reframing, the magic button, the magic dial, and stuff like that, for me personally has been mind-blowing. It's really, really transformed my clinical work, and that's why I see in my own work, ultra rapid recovery. When I treat people, it's pretty much one and done. I meet people for one session only. Now, I give them a lifetime free unlimited tune-ups for the rest of your life if you need it. But I try to complete a course of therapy in one session. And what that means to my way of thinking is I'm generally working with people who have had severe chronic depression and anxiety, and most of them a lot of treatment failure. Some of them have had like 30 or 50 years of failed therapy. And for me, the joy of bringing people like that from tears to joy and laughter in a single session is just mind-blowing. But the thing that has done it, all the parts of TEAM are important. The testing at the beginning and the end of the session, the empathy and asking the patient, what's my grade? We did a session last Tuesday with woman in our group who's had just wrenching anxiety, misery since she's been 13 years old. And I was doing co-therapy with Jill Levitt, who's like one of the greats in the world. And so is Rhonda. We have a lot of fantastic people, but I love working with Jill so much because we're like one person when we're doing therapy, and we were about a third of the way through the work, and we did this, what's my grade? And, I was just sure we were knocking it out of the park on empathy. And she said, it's maybe an A- or an A+. An A- or a B+. That's kind of like a failing grade. And then we found out what we were doing wrong. We weren't using enough I feel statements. And then we did that, and then she felt really warm and care about, and we got an A. The empathy is important, but the huge thing has been the paradoxical agenda setting, or the assessment of resistance, to say to the person, like, what do you want out of the treatment today? Suppose a miracle happens today and you just walk out of here saying, wow, that blew my socks off. What would happen? And they're usually saying, well, this lifelong feeling of worthlessness and anxiety and constant misery would disappear and I'd be happy. And then we do the magic button. Suppose here's a magic button. If you press it, you'll be cured in an instant. You'll be totally euphoric. You want to press that button, and everyone, just about 95% of people say, yes, I'd press it. And then we say, well, I don't have a magic button, but we've got pretty darn powerful techniques, and that could happen, that everything would disappear in today's session. In fact, I predict it probably will, but I'm not sure it'd be a good idea. You guys know all this, what I'm saying. And then I don't think we should I've got all these tools, I don't think we should use them. And the person says, why not? That doesn't seem fair. I want you to use those tools. Well, right away, the patient is chasing us. We're not trying to sell something to the patient. Trying to sell something to the patient is the biggest mistake in therapy, and I did it myself, made that mistake for years. And most therapists in the United States, they're trying to sell something. ACT therapists are trying to sell ACT. EMDR therapists are trying to sell EMDR. Cognitive therapists are trying to sell cognitive therapy, and so on and so forth. And that's why all the schools of therapy fail. With at least 50% of the depressed patients don't meet the criteria, even incredibly humble criteria for improvement. And it's because the therapist is selling, and this forces the patient to resist. And instead, we've learned, and what a fantastic new learning it's been for me, to help the patient see that your depression, your anxiety, your rage, your worthlessness, your shame, your panic, your hopelessness is showing awesome things about you. Maybe we better list what all of these are before we go about, making all this stuff disappear. And then we come up with a list of 10, 15, 20, 30 mind-boggling, beautiful things that the symptoms show about the patient. And this shocks the hell out of patients. It's like they've never thought of anything like that before. And then I say, God, then we either do the acid test or the pivot question, like, well, gosh, sure, we can make these symptoms disappear, but that doesn't make any sense given all these beautiful things, like your guilt about your abortion shows your love for the child who died. Your suffering is a beautiful thing about you, or your guilt about your daughter getting shot in the face and telling yourself a bad mother. It shows what a beautiful mother you really are, and how much you love her, and how accountable you are, and blah, 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 and all that stuff. And the patient can't deny it. And so my role as a therapist is to become the patient's subconscious resistance. And the resistance is a beautiful thing. It's not what we were taught, like the patient wants to feel sorry for themselves, or they're trying to get secondary gain, with their symptoms of depression and stuff like that. And it's just illuminating. And then the anti-all or nothing technique, the magic dial, is, well, maybe we don't want to make all those symptoms disappear, but just tone them down a little bit, turn them down. What would be a healthy amount of guilt? How much rage would you want to be feeling by the end of the session? Your anger is a good thing, but what's a good amount, so you don't have to be suffering so much? That's it. And the view of resistance is coming from what's beautiful and awesome about the patient, and the view of resistance is coming from the fact that all these negative feelings have powerful advantages and benefits. That's a new view of resistance, and Freud never had that idea. He spent his life trying to solve the problem of resistance, but he never did figure it out. He just came up with a lot of baloney stuff that's never panned out. It's partially true. And he created this 5 years of daily psychoanalysis to get rid of your resistance, and it just isn't very, very effective. But this is something that only takes 20 or 30 minutes, and it also has tremendous mood elevating effects. But it's hard to learn because it's not what we were taught. We were taught patients are broken and we're experts and we're supposed to fix them. And then this is the opposite idea, that it's not your brokenness that causes your symptoms, but your wholeness, your what's beautiful about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the other thing, that came up in the group too, is the counterintuitive effect of not wanting to jump in and fix somebody, right? Yeah. Somebody comes and they're depressed or anxious. Oh, I can help you. Except that, again, is so much the opposite of what will, in fact, help them.
Yeah. Right. And that's just a basic thing of human nature. And it's not just humans, it's animals, and it's even protons and electrons follow these rules. We adopted this beautiful cat from the Humane Society, a 6-year-old, and her mother had died, or her father, whoever it was. And so she had to go to the pound, unfortunately. we found her and adopted her. She's the most loving cat in the world. But even there, like if she's on the bed next to me and, you know, and I'm petting her and she's purring, but she's 6 inches away. So I put my hand gently on the other side of her body to pull her to my chest so she'll cuddle. What does she do? She pushes in the opposite direction instantly. And it's just a basic property of the universe.
Well, David, that leads to another question on their list. You know, why do people come to therapy supposedly for help to get better, but they don't want to get better and they have this resistance?
Well, Sharon will now give a brilliant answer to that question.
Oh my gosh.
Welcome to the podcast, Sharon.
Oh, I don't know. I'm a human being and I like to think about things from like a normal human being perspective for a second. I just think, well, we're in this weird culture where like our culture thinks you're supposed to do things a certain way. You're supposed to get better the way the doctor says. And I mean, isn't it human nature that if someone like tells you like, this is what you have to do right now, like you might not be ready to go for it. I was ready to go for it when someone recommends something to me. Sometimes I have to think about things sometimes or make sure that they really got me. And I think that's what TEAM really helps with. Like getting understood is part of the path to getting better. But our culture forces a lot of, I don't know if I use like overused word, but invalidating stuff.
Yeah.
Down our throats. You know, it's not okay to be suffering or be sick. It's not right to think that way, like that kind of stuff. And we have to work against that.
I love that what you're saying. That is so true on so many levels. When the book was dedicated to Obi, my cat, who taught me so much, and I loved him more than life itself. And we had him for 8 years. He was just this violent predator who came wounded to our house, and he turned into my best friend in the world. And then he disappeared one night in the middle of the night. We have a mountain lion behind our house, and I was always afraid the mountain lion would get him. And I'm afraid that's probably what happened. And I've just missed him so much. And when I was talking about it in the Tuesday group, how I'd lost Obi and how much grief I felt, this person started trying to cheer me up. Mm-hmm. I just felt like saying, screw you, shut up. You know, I don't want this crap you're throwing at me. This is this is sacred territory right now. And I want to grieve for my Obi. And I'm going to grieve for him for the rest of my life. Every day when I go out jogging, I shout out, Obi, Obi, twice like that. And, you know, I know he won't pop his head out from behind a tree or something. But, when people are trying to tell us what to do, there's just a natural tendency to oppose it. That's how TEAM came about. When I was a psychiatric resident, and I'll shut up because what you guys are saying is more important, but I was told you can only say 2 sentences every session. Tell me more, and you can do it twice, and that's all you're allowed to say. And I was thinking, this is sucky. This is so stupid. How am I going to help my patient get a better marriage or get over their depression? And so it's because I was told to do that by psychoanalysts that TEAM therapy has evolved as the exact opposite of what I was taught. So you're right. We don't like to be told what to do.
Hey, Bob, let's ask, why don't you ask Dr. Burns another question?
Well, the next question might be with empathy. What do you do and how do you show empathy to someone who's suicidal?
Well, I mean, that's a complex question because there's 2 issues with someone who's suicidal, and any listeners who are interested can listen to my podcasts on, you know, how to deal with suicidal patients. And there's also a chapter, the prediction and prevention of suicide in the psychotherapy ebook that everyone in our Tuesday group uses as part of the training that we do. But let me just say it's easy to empathize with someone who's suicidal. I'm sure you're feeling hopeless and just horrible, and depression and hopelessness are some of the worst forms of human suffering, and so on and so forth. But I don't rely on empathy with someone who's suicidal. And at the intake evaluation, I tell patients, I evaluate if they're suicidal on the easy diagnostic system. There's very good questions on, do you ever struggle with suicidal fantasies, suicidal urges? Have you ever had suicidal plans? Same with homicidal as well. And if it looks at the initial evaluation that the person has some significant suicidal inclinations. Now, I specialize in the treatment of depression, so I've probably had at least 30,000 therapy sessions with people who are suicidal. However, the issue is, can I trust this person? And is it safe to treat this person? Because the Hippocratic Oath says, do no harm. And if I treat someone with a form of therapy that could result in their death, that to me is unethical. And so I simply tell the patients, I try to evaluate if they're actively suicidal at the initial evaluation, or if they're going to be. And if it looks like there's a risk, I tell them, if I accept you as my patient, you would have to give me a lifetime guarantee that you'll never make a suicide attempt, no matter what. Because I have the tools to change your life, but my tools cannot be effective with someone who's playing the suicide card, keeping the door open for the possibility of suicide, attempting suicide. I can't work under that kind of pressure as a voluntary outpatient therapist. And if the patient can't give me that irreversible guarantee, then I can't be at peace treating the patient. I'll worry about them every weekend. Are they going to be alive on Monday, or am I going to get a call from the coroner, and maybe then a call from some attorney who's suing for the fact that a patient committed suicide? And this is, again, a part of the agenda setting, a part of making the patients accountable. It's another example of the gentle ultimatum. And the vast majority of patients say, I'll work with you, I'll take that card off the table, and then they do well. But that's my approach. And then you can afford to empathize and give the patient support. I told my patients, I don't like, I'm working on my own, and so I don't appreciate tons of emergency calls. But if you're actively suicidal and it's 3 a.m, I'd rather hear from you at 3 a.m. than hear from the coroner at 4 a.m. And that's my philosophy about it. Many therapists are enraged by my approach, and against the same as they don't like team therapy in general, because they don't want to make patients accountable, and they think they can, save everybody and do it on the patient's terms. And I say, if that's the way you want to do it, God bless you. And, you're a better man than I, Gunga Din. But that approach doesn't work for me. And my students like Matt May and others who have taken my approach have reported that they really like it. It's made their life vastly more peaceful and joyous.
Sure. Yes.
So instead of getting David to talk, Rhonda, because we can get David to talk every week, let's get these folks to talk.
Well, suicide is a big topic in our community.
What is?
I'm glad you brought it up. It's a big scary topic in our community.
Oh, it's scary, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the dark side of psychiatric practice.
It sure is. It sure is. Yeah. And I think least talked about, though maybe it should be most or more often talked about.
Yeah. Which is another real quick thing. If a patient commits suicide, they'll hire some Harvard expert to testify for you in court that suicide can't be predicted. And indeed, the literature does show that. And so that's a defense. It's I don't know how strong or good a defense it is, but that's one of the strategies. But it's not true that suicide can't be predicted. Suicide can always be predicted with almost total accuracy. The only reason people say it can't be predicted is because they refuse to use assessment instruments and measure things in a sensible way. I did a study at Stanford of how accurate the experts were in knowing which patients were suicidal after a 2-hour interview with the patient. And the accuracy was 0%. The patient's self-report of how suicidal they were at the end of the 2-hour interview was totally uncorrelated with the expert's opinion of how suicidal they were. Because when you don't measure, you don't know how people feel. That's why on the brief mood survey, and I won't see a patient unless they agree to take it before and after 100% of sessions with no exceptions. And then they're asked on the current version 3 suicidal questions. Are you having thoughts? Are you having urges? Are you making plans? Essentially those 3 questions. And how are you feeling, at the beginning of the session? How do you feel at the end of the session? So the therapist will know 99% of the time when someone's suicidal. The patient can fool you, but usually they'll be very honest with you, and then you get a chance to save their life. But if you don't, saying,
Dr. Burns, these experts who were assessed, like they weren't asking those kind of pretty simple questions.
Well, I'll tell you what, they didn't know I was going to test them. I had to pull it on them by surprise. But they were doing, the SCIDS diagnostic interview. They were doing that for 2 or 3 hours with the patient.
I see.
In order to assign diagnoses so I could validate my easy diagnostic system. And then at the end of that time, I had them turn their backs to each other and take my brief mood survey, as well as rate the empathy, the interviewer's empathy and helpfulness. And then the interviewers rated their perception of the patient and how they thought the patient would rate the empathy. Actually, everything that the experts tried to estimate was less than 10% accurate. Mm-hmm. Empathy was 9%. Depression was only 3% accurate. Therapists do not know how your patients are feeling, and you don't even know that because you think you're an expert. That's what I thought when I started out. And that's why the assessment instruments, I don't think you can do ethical or valid therapy without that information. And I don't know, do you folks use those scales, and do they inform you as to what's going on with your patients?
The brief mood surveys?
Yeah, before and after each session.
Oh, absolutely. I have to. It's the most valuable feedback. I always think of it as taking their pulse before and after. And the most valuable part is to get the feedback.
Yeah.
That either you're on target or off target. And to me, it's critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
I agree about the feedback because, I'm just so won over by these techniques and that's how simple they are, frankly. Like getting feedback is so simple. Like you just ask the person, right? On paper and, verbally.
You planning to kill yourself this week? Oh, yes. Right. Yes, sir. I'm going to do it on Friday. Oh, I'm glad I asked.
It's very simple. And people will usually be really honest about how they're feeling and what didn't work for them in that session.
Yeah.
So I use your brief mood survey, and I also use some other instruments for other symptoms at times, depending if there's like a particular goal in mind. Yeah.
Do you ever get lower than 20 on the empathy scale?
Practically every time.
Yeah. Does it ever hurt your feelings?
Sometimes, like if I think I was a hotshot that day, I'll be kind of like, oh man.
That happens to me. I often think I'm a hotshot. I thought it was on a Sunday hike. I thought I was blowing this woman's mind. I thought, oh, David, you are better than mashed potatoes or something. Mm-hmm. And I discovered at the end, she was not only failing me, she was livid with not anger but rage. Mm-hmm. It was such a shock to the system. Yeah. Fortunately, I persuaded her to talk it over with about 3 days later, and then that deepened our relationship. But yeah, it's
really humbling. It's really humbling.
Yeah.
But it's also been really helpful because if we can be totally honest, I think we can get somewhere.
Oh yeah.
Right. Then we know what we can work on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'm so proud of you to hear you say that. And I couldn't agree more. Yeah, and that's you were asking about the death of the therapist's ego. That's one of the 4 deaths, the empathy death, where you find out, that you're not the way you thought.
That's not the way you thought, right? It's true, but it's such valuable information. It's not it's not something I take personally at all anymore. It's more like, oh, well, this is very useful, and happens all the time. But it's so correcting because you just don't realize that you're not coming through. But yeah, so valuable.
Well, I'm hopeful that Brandon's book club will also be helpful for his members who are general public from all over the world, India, and people coming from all over the place. We'll find out.
Mm-hmm. Such a great idea. Great idea.
Another question that's pretty interesting that came out of your group, and any of you could probably answer this question is, how can people be happy when they have negative thoughts and their negative thoughts are true and might indicate awesome and beautiful things about them?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that, Bob?
Well, there's always a choice. There's what's going on in your life, and there's how you look at it and what you make of it. And so the whole idea is, do you want to be happy despite the fact that XYZ is going on, and that you have control over? It's not just what's happening, it's what you think about that's happening that makes you feel bad or good. And so, but it was a very serious question people had in terms of, hey, somebody comes, they say, my life really stinks. How can I ask the person to be happy? And that's how that question evolved. And so for that, we need some professional guidance, I think. So, Dr. Burns?
Yeah, the facts of our life are never going to make us happy or unhappy. It's only your thoughts about them, and sometimes sadness is indicated, and sometimes anger is healthy. Sometimes fear is healthy. So we're not trying to change healthy negative emotions, but if you're feeling depressed or you have high anxiety or high levels of guilt and shame and hopelessness, that's not caused by valid negative thoughts. That's always caused by distorted thoughts. And if you want, you can change the way you feel. The question that you asked, Rhonda, which you read here, is a little hard to answer, though, because it's general. And I always say, give me an example. What time of day were you having negative thoughts? And, what would you like to be feeling? Do you want help with this? Or did you just want let me know that maybe your wife is or your husband or someone is a jerk? Or were you looking for help with this or what? Because there's really 2 major things that influence our psyche. One is, our motivation, our resistance. How do you want to feel? And then secondly, the whole idea of the cognitions, the cognitive distortions, the thinking errors. And those are the 2 basic sources of energy we use in healing. And I'll shut up because what I'm saying seems kind of like a waste of time or something. But anyway, but I always like to say, give me an example. I don't try to answer these questions theoretically with patients until after they recover. Then they can see all the answers to the theoretical questions. But with the patient is there something you want help with? What time of day did it occur? Where were you when you were upset? And I love this, I don't know if it came up in your group, but the whole idea that Mark Noble and I kind of came up with about fractal psychotherapy, that all of your sufferings encapsulated in any one moment. And the moment you understand what was going on in that moment, you'll understand, in most cases, the key to all of your suffering. And when you develop the ability to change, find the technique that helps you at that one moment, that technique will help you most, if not all the times, now and for the rest of your life when you're upset. And so I always like to work through these specific fractals and what's going on with a person and work through the specifics, help someone go from despair to joy. Then all of these philosophical questions, the patient can quickly understand the answers to. One of the things I like about team therapy is that there is a spiritual dimension. I mean, I'm no religious guy. I'm kind of fulminantly anti all religions, to be honest, because I was raised in the son of a Lutheran minister, and I didn't like a lot of what I saw. But there is a very spiritual component about recovery from depression or anxiety or a conflicted relationship, spiritual dimensions that have to do with the death of the self and, kind of rebirth or whatever words you want to use to describe it. I don't know, do you see that in your work, Sharon and Bob, also, that kind of philosophical dimension?
Well, this makes me think of your word enlightenment that you use.
Yeah.
And I can't make so many claims that I help people achieve enlightenment, all day, every day. Because again, I'm a really flawed psychiatrist who's still just learning. But the few times it's like just so powerful because like all of a sudden the person is kind of like way beyond.
Yeah. Right.
Dare I say it this way, all that crap.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. That's right. Yeah.
And so it's like all of a sudden they're like made of Teflon or something. And,
yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thing.
Yeah. So all the hurtful stuff, all the, insults you can hurl at them, this is like, well, okay, so what?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's what you said earlier, Sharon, about how, like, when we're just open and we're just ordinary, that's when the magic occurs. And we're trying to work together, and we're not trying to be experts or special, you want to have expertise to share with your patients, and with your colleagues, but it's when we're human with each other that the magic occurs.
The human is the
so
best
true.
part.
That's so true. One of the other questions that came up, well, in terms of being in touch with the spiritual side, it's always about, from my point of view, really focusing on what that person's experience is and trying to get my understanding of their understanding. But it is such a spiritual thing when you're helping someone in a way that is powerful. But there were some practical questions that came about too. And one was, most of these people work in clinic settings or in settings where they can only see people for 50 minutes. And the question then was, how do you actually do something that if you're working for 2 hours or 3 hours, you can really engage many of the methods. But if you're working just for a short period of time, what is a model that could actually work to teach team over that period of time?
We had a Tuesday group on that, 3 weeks ago, Rhonda?
Right.
And we let people in the group who were a specialty and with short sessions, like Sunny Choi, had to learn to do team in like 35 or 40-minute sessions because he was working at a clinic where they were flooded, community mental health facility, flooded with patients, many of whom didn't even speak English. And he got really good at it and could then and still today completes therapy for most of his patients in 3 or 4 sessions. And but at my hospital in Philadelphia, they asked me if I would set up a cognitive therapy program because they didn't have any psychiatry at the hospital. And I said, well, I will do it for free. I'll be your department chairman for free, but you have to do something new and innovative. And so we set up a big group cognitive therapy program using my book, 10 Days to Self-Esteem, for the people in our community. And we ran thousands of patients through that program. And we outlawed individual psychotherapy, and we outlawed 1-hour sessions. And we saw everyone for a minimum of 8 hours a day of therapy in groups. And they came in every day. And patients recovered really rapidly, and it was a very inexpensive program. And we went in 1 year from 2 full-time employees to 200 full-time employees in our Department of Psychiatry. And other hospitals, mental hospitals were going broke because they were on the old-fashioned system. So I think that, I mean, it's always worth rethinking how you develop mental health care in a facility, and is it smart to use this 1-hour session model? And to my own thinking, I think it's a poor decision. It's like saying we're going to do open heart surgery, but we're going to do it in 45-minute sessions once a week. And it wouldn't make sense. But the thing is, if you're stuck with that, Jill Levitt and Sonny and a number of do it, and you have to explain to the patient, we're going to do some empathy first, and then once I'm really understanding you, then next session we're going to go about finding out what you want, and maybe melting away your resistance, and then we'll be using some methods and so forth. You have to get buy-in from the patient and let them know that the model doesn't involve just coming in talking about a new problem every week, but agreeing to work on one problem every session until that problem is totally resolved. And at that point, then we can probably deal with tons of problems in your life in 10 minutes, because it's all going to be the same thing over and over again. Your negative thoughts in different situations are generally the same exact pattern. The details differ from situation to situation, but the pattern is always the same. And so you really want to emphasize that fractal psychotherapy concept that we're going to focus on one moment until we've got it mastered. Does that make sense, Rhonda? Or
that makes sense.
Yeah.
But the other question in doing that, so the daily mood log is a basic operating tool that we all use. And in lines with what you were saying, would you not then use the first daily mood log, the one that they started working on? Would you not use that over a number of weeks, or how
I would
do you
personally? I do, because when I work with people, all I offer them help with is one daily mood log, and actually one thought on one daily mood log is the most help I can give you. Mm-hmm. But the moment they smash one thought, their depression disappears, and then they can smash all of them, and they're good to go. Do relapse prevention training, and now the therapy is done. That's the approach I take. And then I tell people, I'll give you tune-ups as often as you want for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And that's a great message to give people too. And then they occasionally, I give someone a tune-up, but not that often. And I get to telling people, I wish you would relapse, because otherwise I'll never get a chance to work with you again. So it's very paradoxical, but it's a fun message, and for me it's effective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Once you teach people how to like be their own therapists, right? How to prevent their own, deal with relapses, because those relapses of symptoms occur. They don't need you anymore.
Sharon, I have some information for you.
Uh-oh.
Your children love you, and they're calling you now. And this is what you were saying. And my hat's off to you and to all of the women in our groups who are doing so much. I don't know how your wife, mother, expert, therapist, teacher. It's just my hat's off to you. But it's been so delightful getting to know you, Sharon. Thank you.
It's been really fun, Dr. Burns. Thanks for having me. Got to get my kids, but this has been awesome.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, this is great.
Give them a hug for me.
Great.
I will. See you all guys soon. Bye.
Thank you for being here.
Bye-bye.
So this was Good.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you get some of your questions answered?
I think we did, and hopefully the people in the group will be listening.
Well, you did ask one other question since we were talking about the spiritual level of team, that I wondered if we could talk about a little bit, and that is because sometimes, like when we do methods, and we're talking about challenging negative thoughts, we can either defend against them and attack them in order to challenge them, or we can find some truth and acceptance in them.
Mm-hmm. And
you had wanted to talk about a little about how do people take that path of acceptance.
Mm-hmm. And that's a question that people had. And the acceptance paradox is obviously one method.
What is
to
that,
help
Bob?
With that.
What's the acceptance?
The acceptance paradox is when you accept your own flaws and frailties, but you put them in a context where you don't take them that seriously. Mm-hmm. Is my understanding of it. Mm-hmm. But that's a very powerful technique. And so often when I ask people what was really helpful, they'll say that when I was able to accept what things, how I am, that was very, very freeing. But the question here came from, are there more things than just the acceptance paradox that can help people really follow a path of acceptance? Are there other strategies and methods to help people do that?
There are in the app, by the way, we've written what I think is a very strong section. The app is classes. There's basic classes, and then you use the daily mood log. Mm-hmm. So there's like basic training. We've got about 8 hours of basic training. And one of the things we focus on there is the acceptance paradox, the magic of the acceptance paradox. And it's hard to see. It's like seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time. When you see it, it blows your mind. But if you've never been there, it's almost impossible to grasp it or to have some feeling for it. I think that the externalization of voices in role play, where you do role reversals and then you show it to the patient, and then they suddenly, I see, and they laugh and they get their enlightenment. I think that's the best way. But there are also a number of specific techniques in TEAM that we're highlighting, tons of techniques in the app, but one is the idea of be specific. That it's only when you overgeneralize from a specific failure to yourself, only then can depression occur. It's impossible to be depressed without overgeneralization or labeling. Mm-hmm. And the overgeneralization and labeling are nonsensical. When you generalize to yourself. So like if I were to have the thought, David, you're a worthless human being, then I could talk back to myself and say, probably everything about me needs improvement, but what are you thinking about, big guy? What specific screw up did I make? And then whatever specific screw up, I can say, oh yes, I sure screwed up on that one, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. And, and it can't get to me. And then another one is, let's define terms, so where you begin to see that these overgeneralizations and labels, like I'm a bad father, or I'm a failure, or I'm an inferior human being, that any way you try to define those terms, it's nonsensical. It makes no sense. There's no such thing as an inferior human being or a superior human being. We all have tons of flaws, and we all have certain things that we're, average at or above average at. But there's no such thing as a superior or inferior human being. You can look at the ratings of the top 200 tennis players in the world, and every day they're rated precisely from 1 to 200, and based on their tournament win-loss ratios. But all you're measuring is their skill at tennis. You're not measuring their worthwhileness as a human being. You can't measure a worthwhileness as a human being. And so part of it is letting go of some of these constructs that make us miserable. And this is what the Buddha was trying to talk about 2,500 years ago. And it's very simple. Any fourth grade or third grade child could understand what I'm saying right now, but adults can't. And very few people understood the Buddha. And then Wittgenstein was trying to say the same thing. The philosopher who died in 1950, who never published anything when he was alive, but now a lot of people view him as the greatest philosopher of all time. And to me, that's certainly the case. And he said the problems of philosophy, again, it's this nonsensical realm we get into. Like, do human beings have free will? You know, you think, oh, free will is a thing I have to have. What if I don't have it? You know, you get all upset, and it's just a nonsensical notion. And so I can't remember what we're talking about.
We were talking about getting to the
it's a very exciting dialogue from my point of view. And so it's just like getting people to the point where you give up on thinking that yourself can be measured or rated. And Albert Ellis said the same thing. There's no way to measure the value of a human being. We can measure the value of what we do or say or think. And then once you see really clearly that you don't have a self that can be measured, then if you're real brave, you can take the last step and get rid of yourself entirely and realize that's just another nonsensical notion. And that's a way to free yourself from suffering, because all of this emotional suffering has to do with thinking that you have a self that could be better or less than.
Yeah, it's all self-imposed based on these old images and concepts.
But I never say anymore that there's no such thing as a self, or that the concept of the self has no meaning, because people get so pissed off at me when I say that, and they don't understand it. And they can't understand the difference between the statement, there's no such thing as a self, and this statement, I have a self has no meaning. And the latter is my position.
Fascinating. Yeah.
But people can't see that distinction when I say, I don't know what you mean when you're talking about you have a self, you know, and all schools of therapy, they're trying to say, here's what the self is. ACT has, self is like the person watching the emotions go down like a river. The self is like the chessboard that the chess game is played on. It's just a lot of bullshit malarkey. It's just, I know I didn't mean to say that. I mean, it's brilliant thinking, but to me, it's just metaphors that you're thinking are real things. But anyway, getting out of that idea of a self is certainly a way to inner peace, I would say, and better human relationships, because all wars and hatred comes from thinking that there's these selves out there that are not as good as me.
Sure.
These bad people. And we need to kill them and exterminate them. They're like rats or vermin or something, and people get hypnotized by this so easily, humans, and we think, oh man, this is so important, right? And it's just a lot of nonsense.
I think it's so true. I want to keep talking, but I'm on so little juice. Maybe we can have a little ending piece in case I run out of juice.
Okay, maybe this would be the appropriate time to end. I think we've been on about an hour, and it's great. We've had a really great discussion about so many interesting things, and it's been wonderful to have you, Bob, and Sharon before she left.
It's always a joy. Yeah, it's always a joy to see you. Thank you so much for all that you've done and for just being you.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I mean, not that you don't exist, but all these things that come out of you are pretty awesome.
And for creating more and more team community, building community is so wonderful and valuable to have a sense of belonging.
We love you.
I love belonging to you guys. So great to see you both. Great. Bye-bye.
Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
This has been another episode of the Feeling Good podcast. For more information, visit Dr. Burns' website at feelinggood.com, where you will find the show notes under the podcast page. You will also find archives of previous episodes and many resources for therapists and non-therapists. We welcome your comments and questions. If you want to support the show, please share the podcast with people who might benefit from it. You could also go to iTunes and leave a 5-star rating. I am your host, Rhonda Borowski, the director of the Feeling Great Therapy Center. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I invite you to join us next time for another episode of the Feeling Good podcast.